So, Mr. Francesco Mariani, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
So, I know this discussion is mostly about Plato. What is his theory of forms?
Okay, so do you have a couple of days? No, I'm kidding. So, as you know, theory of forms by Plato is one of the most important aspect of Platonic philosophy, and is very complicated, disseminated in so many different dialogues, and so is up to um, scholars to try to uh, gather together this different passages and texts, so to, let's say, deduce overall interpretation of what Plato meant by the theory of forms. So if we want to go to the very basics of this theory, we can say that Plato, for a number of reasons, was convinced that the structure of our reality is twofold. And he was convinced that we can really understand reality if we understand that there is an internal dualism in our reality, so in the world we live in. So on the one hand, we have forms or ideas, and on the other side we have empirical reality, so the visible world. The fundamental ideas of Plato, let's say something that is at the core of his dualistic interpretation of reality, is the fact that the visible world is an ever-changing reality. Things are transient, temporary. So Plato's ideas was that we can never really understand reality if we can count only on this transient empirical facts. So we have to find a more reliable and stable ground on which we can understand the structure of reality. And this is why basically Plato resorted to these theories of forms or ideas. It depends on the translation, in which basically Plato says that we can understand the empirical reality that we have before our eyes by accessing this word of ideas or forms. Ideas and forms are principles, self-standing entities. They are in a different region from an ontological point of view, in a different region of the world. And since we are rational beings, we can access this different region of the world. In so doing, we can obtain a knowledge that is finally stable, certain, and we will use the knowledge that we get from this encounter with ideas first as a criteria to understand the empirical world, and second, to transform the world accordingly to ideas. I know that this theory of form is very complicated, and then scholars have said that the entire history of Western philosophy can go under the title of a footnote to what Plato said about the theory of forms and ideas. Probably this is sort of an over exaggeration, but in a certain sense, it is true that the death of Socrates was the end of the ancient Greek culture as it was until that point. And with the philosophy of Plato, we have the opening of a new era in terms of epistemological duties and interpretations of reality. I mean, we cannot underestimate the importance and how consequential the Platonic philosophy has been in the 25 centuries that are between Plato and us.
So you said this external world is always changing. Reality is always changing. So does that not mean that the internal is also changing? Are ideas staying the same? Are they constant?
Yes. So let's say that we have to make an extra step in order to understand what Plato is referring to when he talks about ideas or forms. Because, of course, we have this modern idea of ideas is ideas are nothing but mental representations. I know that what an idea is because I'm actually thinking of something. This can be applied also to the Platonic theory, but in that sense, we have a strong metaphysical commitment to this idea that there is another region, invisible region of the being. So there is a part of the world that we don't see, but that is the internal structure of the visible world that we experience every day. So in a certain sense, this is not a surprise that much of this sort of a metaphysical Platonic mechanism will be very useful for the Christian theology of the early centuries. This idea that we can really distinguish between the visible world, what is earthly, the earthly life, and something that is beyond what we can see, will be very influential even on the Christian tradition and Christian theology. So let's say this: ideas are separated entities. They never change. They are stable, and they are articulated in a specific hierarchical form. So we don't have to imagine this invisible world as if it was a chaotic constellation of ideas of different kinds. Plato is, in this sense, quite plain in describing what this invisible world looks like. And he says that ideas are divided into two main categories. The first one is value ideas. For example, the ideas of justice, the ideas of good, the ideas of perfection, the idea of beauty. So we use these ideas that are at the same time values, both as a criteria in judging the world and as a prompt when we have to transform the world in accordance with these values. And there is then a second group of ideas that are the so-called geometrical or ideas that are related to numbers of or math. Why this twofold separations? We can say that probably in devising this idea of invisible world and this theory of forms, Plato was influenced by the Pythagorean tradition. Pythagoras believed that numbers and geometrical forms were separated entities. They had ontological and independent status. And it is possible that this idea that in a certain sense we still understand nowadays that we don't need to draw a specific empirical triangle to understand at least part of the property or features or characteristics of every possible triangle, because we don't need to resort to empirical data. We can just think of a triangle, a general one. We can depict this imaginary triangle in our mind, and from this fictional image of a triangle, we can deduce a lot of properties, a lot of hypotheses and theses about geometry and space and angles and so on. Probably Plato thought that if it is possible for us to obtain specific and certain knowledge about this specific group of autonomous entities, such as the geometrical figures, probably we can do the same. We can obtain the same kind of absolute knowledge about things that are not mathematical in nature. So probably this is an easy way to get into the main Platonic point of view about ideas and forms.
Right. So I'm just thinking.
Yes,
I'm
I know
lost
that.
in thought.
Yeah, it takes time to process all these strange ideas about forms and ideas.
Yeah. So you have the two categories, mathematical and values.
Yes, exactly.
Interesting. Okay. So Plato has another quote that I want to touch upon. True knowledge does not come from sensory experience.
Exactly.
So he's talking about the external world in that case,
Yes,
material world.
And I mean, we don't have to be, Manichaean in judging these positions taken by Plato. So Plato is not necessarily criticizing the empirical world as it is. The only so Plato is motivated by a real epistemological concern.
Mm.
So we have to, when we think about this very convoluted and complicated theory of forms, we have to keep in mind that Plato is animated by this epistemological concern. That is, we want to grasp reality for what reality really is. And so
the pursuit of truth.
Yes, exactly. So in a certain sense, and probably Plato learned the lesson of Socrates, truth is a mission. Truth is the real end goal of whoever is interested in understanding the reality that is around us. It is not only an epistemological duty. Let's say that we are philosophers, we are nature inquirers, we are, in a certain sense, animated by this idea of investigating nature and the world around us. Even if we are not expert in this specific field, truth is also an ethical duty. The two things cannot be separated. This is crucial in Plato's view. So we don't want to obtain real knowledge about the world just because we are, let's say, philosophers or scientists. We would like to spend much of our life contemplating ideas, forms, or the trajectories of the planets. Yes, we take pleasure in this contemplative life, but we don't want to romanticize this idea that philosophers want to spend all their time contemplating theories and forms. We want to achieve this kind of knowledge because we are perfectly aware of this state of matter. That is, we cannot transform the world unless we know the structure of it. Every transformation, political, ethical, social, every transformation of the world is destined to be ineffective if we don't know the structure of the world. This is why Plato poses so much importance on the role of the philosopher king. Not because he was interested in having this personal power, not because he was thirsty for power and social recognition, but at the base of this reasoning, there was the idea that philosophy must be transformative. Without true knowledge about the world, both about the external world, that is about nature and how nature functions, and about human beings, without specific knowledge and expertise in these fields, philosophy will never be transformative. It will be just, playing with words and ineffective and consequential, something that is really, really far from what Plato wanted to achieve with philosophy.
I also want to touch on the tripartite soul. What does that mean?
Yes. So if you look at what Plato says about human souls, you can find that Plato introduces a lot of different distinctions within the human soul or among different human beings. Even in this case, behind this idea of dividing human beings accordingly to the nature of their soul, is the idea that unless you really understand the nature of human beings, you cannot transform society, and you cannot reestablish that kind of harmony among different classes between different human beings within the same political community. Without this sort of harmony, justice can never be achieved. We have to keep in mind that behind this sometimes obscure and at first hard to understand divisions that are introduced by Plato, there is this idea that first, human beings are not exactly equal. Plato is not entirely or not predominantly a democratic thinker. And Plato really thinks that the only way to reestablish harmony among human beings is to first understand the differences that we can find in the nature of the soul. So let's say that Plato introduces a threefold distinction of the human soul. There is a small number of human beings whose soul is predominantly led by reason. So these are the perfect candidates for future philosophers and then future politicians. In this case, in the case of this selected number of human beings, their human soul is rational, and this means that reason is what leads the actions, the decisions, the opinions of this man.
So their first reflex to anything is reason, logic, and like
Yes,
emotion takes a backseat.
exactly. When you correctly say logic, we have just to clarify what we mean by logic. So the idea is that these human beings are not only capable of accessing ideas as they are, so in a sort of intuitive way, but they are able to reflect on the knowledge then that they can gain from this sort of intellectual intuition. So it is logic and it is also reflection. And it is a combination of this intuitive knowledge and our ability to reflect on the knowledge that we gain through intuition that we are what Plato calls philosophers. So we are deep into dialectics. That is a synonym for philosophy. Then there is a second group of people, a larger group of people, not much larger, but nonetheless larger. That is those men who have, or let's say that display a natural and instinctive aggressivity, or men who are inclined to confrontation. Plato says that if you are one of these human beings, probably the philosopher king will put you in the second class of in the second social class in the future Callipolis, the beautiful city. Probably your aggressivity must be tempered, but you will be a perfect guardian. You will make sure that the city as a whole is protected from external aggression, and that this threefold distinctions among human beings within the city is safe and again protected against civil war. Third class, that is the third kind of soul, that it is the kind of soul that is proper to the vast majority of all human beings, is a human soul that we might call sensitive or sensible. That is in the case in which human beings are more prone to follow their desires, their inclinations, their appetites.
So they're ruled by their mind.
They are ruled by their desires, and by the desire of having their needs satisfied. So if you follow through this threefold distinction of human souls, one that is rational, one that is more aggressive, and one that is more appetitive, you see that there is in a sort of an internal hierarchy among these three classes, and this is exactly the same kind of distinction that you might find in the hypothetical city that is portrayed by Plato in the Republic. Human beings will be distinguished accordingly, and those who are led by reason will be a member of the first class, the leading class, those in which we find philosophers. They will lead the city because since they have access to ideas and forms, and so they have real knowledge of the reality, they are in the perfect position to transform society and to make sure that justice is finally achieved on earth. In the second class, you'll find the guardians, or in a different translation, warriors. So if you are prone or inclined to confrontation, probably you are a perfect candidate for being a guardian in the future city. And if you are just part of the great majority of human beings that are driven by their search for happiness, probably you will find yourself in the third social class. In Plato's view, there's no other way to achieve justice on earth as much as it is possible for human beings, is to reestablish an harmony, a specific order among these different classes of people. That is, among these different souls. In this sense, philosophers play the role of the doctor. The doctor has a specific knowledge about human organism. The doctor knows how different organs can act simultaneously, and how these organs can contribute to the well-being of the organism as a whole. So if you take, I think that we should take this analogy in the proper sense. And so philosophers, given their knowledge about human souls and ideas, are like a doctor, and they must reestablish a good harmony among the different organs the city consists of.
Is it possible for, let's say, an aggressive person to become the higher form, to change their nature?
Yes. I mean, it has been repeatedly said that this political program that is delineated by Plato is expression of a authoritarian thinking, and no doubt Plato is not a democratic thinker, and we might say for good historical reason. But then Plato is not advocating the idea of a fixed and unchangeable distinction within society. First, because we have to take into account the fact that when Plato describes this ideal city, we must remember that is a fiction, that is part of his philosophical endeavor. He is not talking about a real city that is somewhere in Europe or somewhere else. What Plato is trying to, the message that Plato is trying to get across to his listeners or readers is the fact that education and philosopher are mainly responsible for the education of the future generations. Philosophers are responsible for the education of the next generation, and they will understand, or let's say they will do their best to assign every single human beings to the proper class. So it is not a matter of wealth, is not a matter of lineage, so it's not an unchangeable situation. If the son of a warrior is proven to have a soul that is driven by reason, this son will join the class of philosophers, and vice versa. Education will make this transition possible. Of course, if you read what Plato says in the Republic, not as a trajectory, something that will happen over time, but if you take what Plato says as if it was a picture, then you have the idea that Plato is not making room for social ascending or descending. But if you understand what Plato is trying to say in the long run, then you can understand that Plato's project is not as authoritarian as many scholars assume.
Interesting. Well, Mr. Francesco Mariani, thank you for your time.
My pleasure.